When you've got a really overgrown fruit tree like the one behind me here, it can be a little bit daunting of pruning it, where to get started. Look, it's not rocket science. I'm going to run through a couple of tips on how to get started. On our property here, this is a really old stone fruit. I'm unsure what species it is. I have a bit of a guess that it might be a peach or a nectarine. It's just going to be a bit of a mystery come spring and summer. But let's get started in some of the tips and techniques on the pruning and of how to manage a large tree like this. So before I get started, I thought I'd just show you a tree that I've just recently finished working on. You can see down the middle core here, I had to take a heck of a lot of large limbs out that were crossing over, and then I've worked my way up the tree, taking out a lot of that upward growth. This is the pile of material that has just come off that same tree I've just shown you. Some of the tools you're going to need for the job is a set of loppers at the back there, good handsaw, secateurs, some gloves, and don't forget your eye protection. Before you get started pruning, it's a good idea to walk all the way around the tree. Have a look at what you're going to be focusing on taking out. I can see the fruit tree here is growing over the chicken pen, so I'm going to look at taking out this back limb here that's leaning over and focus the growth leaning over towards the front here. And then you're going to want to look at going in and having a look at the trunk. What's happening down here as well. Is there any dead and diseased wood out down in there that needs to come out? And try to identify where your original graft is. It's pretty hard to identify what's going on down here. There's a lot of side shoots coming out here, all these little suckers. So I'm going to look at taking out all of that as well. And I'm going to also look at taking out the height. Bring that height right down. What's the point of having a fruit tree if you can't get up to net it and even pick the fruit? Look, it's not such a bad thing to let some of the birds and the wildlife get some of your fruit if you don't mind sharing, but you want to make sure that you can at least access it on a ladder. And when you need to do your yearly pruning, you want to be able to make sure it's at a manageable height. I'm going to be looking at taking out this branch right here. As you can see, it's coming up, it's twisted and twined through the others here, and it's actually leaning and rubbing on this other branch here. So that's going to be the first cut to come out. It's a bit difficult to get access into here when you've got all these little twigs and stuff. You want to generally look at snipping them out of the way. As you can see, if I was to come and cut through here like this, I'm going to be hitting against this branch here and also potentially down here. So coming from under here, I believe, is going to be the best way with putting the saw against that way. Now, when you look at making a cut, you want to make sure that you try to angle the cut downwards so it's not going to direct water into where you've just created that wound, and you want it to drain away. When you get rainfall, you want it to drain away from the trunk, so it's not going to be going in. It's important to try to make sure that you minimize hitting other branches, so you just know, so you're not creating too many extra wounds, which is going to create an entry point for disease and pests to come in. Just finished making the cut here. As you can see, I've come down as low as possible, and I've also looked at coming as close to the other side trunk as I can. Now the branch isn't coming away, it's all lodged up in here. So what I need to do is now looking at making some other higher cuts to free up this piece to bring it out. Okay, that branch come out actually quite easily, and it's left quite a nice clean cut there as well, which I'm happy with. When you come up and have a look higher up, you can see where the branch has been rubbing. So this actually reveals weakened spots in the tree. So I can see there's this bit of this hole here as well, where the tree is yet to be able to properly recover the wound. You can see it's been rubbing here, and then also on this inside here as well. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on those. Now, you will get new shoots and suckers come from this wound, so keep an eye on them. They do deplete the tree from energy, so you want to be able to cut those out in the spring and summer, the growing season. If you're a beginner at doing pruning on fruit trees, look, don't be shy. You're never going to be able to break the tree. It's probably an idea to just start off taking small amounts of growing tips off rather than taking off big cuts. That way you can always come back and do a secondary prune mid-season if you need to. Okay, so now that I've taken out this larger branch, we're going to look at cleaning up these trunks here. This is where the eye protection comes in handy. As you can see, you've got loads of little branches that are going to want to stick into your eyes, so make sure you protect your eyes. I'm going to go ahead and get the secateurs out, make sure they're nice and sharp and you've given them a clean. And we're going to go through and make nice clean cuts as close to the trunk as possible. Let's head in and have a look at the branch structure and identify what's what. So how do you know what branch is alive and what's dead when a tree is dormant? The easiest test that I like to do is just put a bit of pressure against it, and if it snaps easy like that, it's dead. And then if you put a little bit of pressure against a branch like that, you can see it's got a bit of flexibility back to it. That's alive, and you can obviously see that there's a blossom already coming out. Look at that, we've got a little native stingless bee coming in there to pollinate the flower. So, what we've got here is this here is a fruiting bud. That's a growing tip right on the end here. And then you've got a flower blossom that's already coming out. And you can kind of get an idea of looking across the tree, what's happening and where you need to look at making your cuts, how many fruiting spurs you want to leave, and where do you want to prune your stem back to. I want to look at focusing the energy and the sap to run up through this large limb and focus up here into this direction of where most of the main formation of this limb heads out to. And then you want to take out anything that's also on the upper side as well. That's going to take away that upward growth, and you want your diagonal and your downward growth for fruiting trees. All right, as you can see, I've gone through and I've cleaned up this whole limb here. I've taken small little branches from the underside and a lot of the upside branches as well. Once I've worked out where to stop is when I start to get to these bigger branches that start to fan out. Then you need to start looking at how to prune and shape this next stage. Now, one piece of advice that I can say when you are pruning fruit trees, it pretty much applies for any fruit tree. The more branch material you take off, the more growth you're going to have to expect. So that could set back your fruit of that season and that year, but you will get the benefits and the reward the year after, because you're going to have new, young, fresh shoots that then those fruiting buds and spurs can come through. Pruning and managing a fruit tree of this size, it can take several hours, so be patient. There's no rush. Work on a section at a time. Have a break if you need to. Take your time up and down a ladder when you need to get up to a safe height. Make sure you've got good footing. And yeah, just have fun with it. I find it quite therapeutic. So that's starting to tidy things up. So a bit of a pruning tip is start from underneath and work your way up. Look for crossing branches. So see how this branch here is crossing and they're overlapping each other. What I'm going to look at doing is taking at least, say, about 2/3 off. I'm going to look at taking this cut right back down to here. So then this opens up this section for this area here to grow through, and it's not going to be rubbing against the branch that was above it. So I've got some more crossing branches here again. So I've got to decide which one am I going to look at taking out. So you can see the one on the upper side comes over into this space over here. So I'm going to look at making the decision to take that one out, because then the one underneath comes and fills this upper space nicely. As you can see, that takes that out and that frees up that space up there nicely. The amount of branch material that I look at taking off is generally a rule of thumb about 1/3. Let's look at this branch structure right here. I'm going to look at taking this last growing tip back into this little cluster of where you've got 3 branches heading out. That amount there equates for roughly about 1/3. If I was to take it back to here, you can see there's not quite as much fruiting buds. You're going to be losing quite a fair bit, but it's also a good idea to do a bit of a spring test. Put a bit of strength down on the branch and see, you know, picture if that branch was loaded with fruit, how much weight will it be able to hold? And that gives you an idea of how much to take off. Looking at that strength there, it's actually quite a small branch. I might actually look at taking it back a little bit further because I don't think it's going to be able to support as much weight if these ends down here had fruit on them. So I've just finished doing the tidy up here to the second tree just behind us. I'm going to wrap the video up. Hope you've gathered a couple of tips there. So my main advice when you're pruning an old tree is look at taking out diseased wood, any branches that are crossing over from each other, and taking about a third off your overall growth to give it a good haircut. I think I'm due for a haircut as well. I'm Chris. We are The Simple Life on 16 acres here in the Manning Valley. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Tune on in and subscribe.